The kettle whistled just as the morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains. Ravi stood at the counter, a slight bend in his left knee as he poured steaming water into two mismatched mugs. His limp, subtle now after years of physiotherapy, was still noticeable in the way he shifted his weight. He wore it with a quiet acceptance, like someone who had made peace with an uninvited guest. I watched him from the kitchen doorway. Every morning he made tea the same way. 2 spoons of sugar for himself, 1 for me. Small rituals, comfortable patterns. To the world, I had it all: a steady marriage, a gentle husband, a respectable job and corporate training. But even the most perfect-looking portraits sometimes hang crooked. Ravi turned, offered me a mug. "Early meeting?" I nodded, wrapping my fingers around the cup. "Client prep. Big one." He smiled. "You'll do fine. You always do." There was no doubt in his voice, no suspicion. That was Ravi. Constant, believing, good, maybe too good. He trusted me in the way a person trusts the ground beneath them, never expecting it to fall away. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the silence between us familiar, but no longer warm. I studied the scar on his jaw. Faint now, almost elegant. A remnant of the accident that changed our lives 5 years ago. He had been riding his motorbike home after a late shift. A truck ran a red light. He survived, but his left leg never fully recovered. The wedding happened 6 months later, though we postponed the honeymoon indefinitely. First the surgery, then the therapy, then the quiet resignation that things had changed. He still carried himself with dignity, but I saw it in his eyes sometimes, the flicker of pain, the brief moment when he tried to reach for something on the top shelf and remembered he couldn't without favoring his hip. He never complained, and somehow that made it worse. I wasn't sure when the distance began. It wasn't dramatic. No fights, no betrayals. Just a slow fading. We still spoke, still touched, but our intimacy became procedural, like checking a box. We'd lay in bed, side by side, connected by proximity, but not presence. I told myself it was normal, that this was what marriage became. But deep down, I knew I was starving for something more. It wasn't until Karan came back into our lives that I realized how hollow I had become. He first visited one evening, helping Ravi move an old cabinet. I hadn't seen him in nearly a year. Taller than Ravi by a few inches, broader in the shoulders, Karan had a way of commanding a room without trying. He was quiet, almost reserved, but there was an intensity in his stillness, like a storm that hadn't broken yet. He smiled at me when he walked in, brief but firm, and for a second, I forgot how to breathe. That night, after dinner, I watched them laugh together, 2 brothers bonded by blood and boyhood. Ravi looked more alive than he had in weeks. Karan noticed me watching, and our eyes met across the room. He looked away first, but that moment lingered longer than it should have. Later, while washing dishes, I scolded myself. A look means nothing. A smile means less. You're married. You love your husband. But love, I was learning, wasn't always loud. Sometimes it whispered so softly, you could mistake it for silence. Over the next few weeks, Karan came by more often. Sometimes to fix a leaky faucet, sometimes just to bring fresh mangoes from a client's orchard. He and Ravi would talk politics, cricket, old college memories. I would serve tea and listen from the kitchen, pretending not to notice the way. Karan's gaze occasionally found mine. There was no flirting, no words exchanged, just awareness. Priya, my closest friend at work, noticed the change in me. "You've been distracted lately," she said during lunch. "Everything okay at home?" "Fine," I lied. "Just work stuff." But But the truth was harder to explain. I wasn't unhappy. I wasn't mistreated. I was just unfulfilled. And that emptiness had found a mirror in Karen's eyes. One evening, after Ravi had gone to bed early, I walked onto the balcony to find Karan standing alone, his phone in his hand, staring out at the city. "You're quiet tonight," I said. He turned, studied me for a second longer than necessary, and then said, "Some things are better left unspoken." That was the moment. Not a touch, not a kiss, just a sentence that held everything between the lines. I should have walked back inside, but I didn't. The first time Karan touched me, it was by accident, or so I told myself. He was helping Ravi install curtain rods in the living room. Ravi, frustrated by the screws slipping, had gone to the hardware store for the third time that morning. I stayed behind to hold the stepladder, to steady it while Karan reached overhead. His hand brushed mine when he came down. Just skin on skin, nothing more. But my pulse betrayed me. Neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us like a thread pulled too tight. Then casually, Karan stepped back, wiping imaginary dust from his hands. I turned toward the kitchen, pretending to check on the kettle. My breath felt shallow. Later that night, I replayed the moment in my mind, analyzing it from every possible angle. It was harmless. It meant nothing. And yet, I felt marked. Ravi was asleep beside me, one arm draped across his chest, his breathing slow and deep. I studied his face in the dim light. He looked peaceful, trusting. That trust wrapped around my ribs like a vice. The next time Karan came by, it was with lunch from a small eatery he and Ravi loved growing up. They sat together, on the floor, unwrapping banana leaves and laughing over stories from school. I sat on the couch, half listening, half watching Karan's hands as he spoke. There was a presence about him. Not arrogance, something more grounded. When he looked at me, he didn't flinch. He saw me. And the weight of that gaze made me forget how to be ordinary. It was Priya who noticed my shift again. "You've been humming," she said over coffee one afternoon at work. "Is that a crime now?" She raised an eyebrow. "No, but last week you said you couldn't remember the last time you felt excited about anything. Now you're glowing." I shrugged. Maybe I'm just getting better sleep. But I wasn't. I lay awake most nights, my thoughts tangled. I knew what I was playing with. I knew the fire, and still, I moved closer. The escalation wasn't planned. It crept in quietly, like water through a crack in the wall. One evening, Ravi was late from a doctor's appointment. I offered Karan a cup of tea. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, both pretending the distance was safety. "You're not happy, are you?" he asked suddenly. I froze. "What makes you say that?" "You look at him like you're trying to convince yourself. That's cruel. It's honest." I didn't answer. I couldn't. He stood up and walked to the window, arms crossed. "I'm not judging you, Maya," he said after a long pause. "But pretending costs more than admitting." The air between us thickened. There was no touch, no confession. Just the terrible clarity of being seen. The first kiss came days later. It was a Tuesday. Ravi had gone to bed early after a particularly exhausting session of therapy. I found Karan still in the kitchen, drying his hands on a towel. I meant to say goodnight, to thank him for helping again. But instead, I stood there, frozen in the archway. Karan looked at me, really looked. And in that glance, every wall I had built collapsed. He stepped forward, slowly, cautiously, as if giving me time to run. I didn't. The kiss was quiet. No music, No thunder, just the sound of breath catching and a soul cracking open. I pulled away first. "This is a mistake," I whispered. He nodded. "I know." But neither of us moved. Over the next few weeks, the secrecy multiplied. Glances became touches. Touches became meetings when Ravi wasn't home. I kept telling myself I was in control, that it hadn't gone too far yet, that I could still stop. But guilt doesn't sleep. It festers. It shows up in how you overcompensate, how you laugh a little too hard at your husband's jokes, how you rush to kiss him goodbye at the door. Ravi didn't notice. Or if he did, he said nothing. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I found one of his socks, worn thin at the heel, the fabric stretched where the brace rubbed. I held it in my hands, tears threatening. How do you betray someone who has never wronged you? That night, I told Karan we needed to stop, that it had to end before it destroyed all three of us. He agreed. But the next morning, I woke to a message. Room 508. One night. No questions. I stared at it for minutes, and against every instinct, I didn't delete it. The train ride to Indore was uneventful. Gray fields blurred past the window as Maya leaned her forehead against the cool glass. Her laptop was open, documents waiting for revision, but her thoughts moved elsewhere. Room 508. One night, no questions. She'd read the message 36 times since yesterday. Not a plea, not a demand, just a door quietly left open. Ravi had packed her suitcase the night before, folding each blouse neatly, slipping in a tiny sachet of lavender. As he zipped the bag shut, he placed a small worn keychain on top, a crescent moon, a token from a beach trip they'd taken in better days. "For luck," he said, "just in case the presentation gods are grumpy." She had smiled, kissed his cheek, and turned away before he could see her expression crack. Now, hours later, she entered the hotel lobby under the weight of choices made in silence. No one greeted her by name. No one cared who she was or why. She was there. That anonymity made it easier. At the desk, she gave her name. The receptionist nodded, slid a card across the counter, and said, "5th floor, ma'am. Elevator to the left." The hallway smelled of lemon cleaner and stale, ere she passed a housekeeping cart. A maid glanced up, then back down. No one asked questions. The keycard clicked. The door opened. Room 508 was generic. Beige walls, neutral carpet, a bed with crisp sheets that hadn't been slept in. The curtains were drawn but not tight. Afternoon light seeped through like a half-forgiven truth. He was already there. Karan stood by the window, arms folded, eyes shadowed by uncertainty. Not regret, not desire. Something more fragile. Recognition. They were no longer people flirting with the edge. They were across it now. No one spoke. Maya placed her bag near the high-key desk and walked to the center of the room. Her heartbeat was deafening. She felt both rooted and untethered, like a tree in a storm trying to pretend it wasn't moving. Karan stepped forward. The kiss this time wasn't quiet. It wasn't curious. It was desperate, hungry, honest. Months of restraint dissolved into motion, shirts lifted, skin revealed, a chaos of limbs and breath. Time unraveled. They didn't make promises. There were no whispered futures or poetic declarations, just the rhythmic language of bodies seeking something they couldn't name. Afterward, Maya lay awake, the sheets cool against her back. Karan slept beside her, his chest rising and falling, in a steady cadence. She stared at the ceiling, counting the light cracks in the plaster. Her phone buzzed once. A message from Priya. "How'd the meeting go? You okay?" She didn't answer. Instead, she slid out of bed, careful not to wake him, and moved to the window. Below, the city pulsed. Cars, lights, strangers moving through their own stories, unaware of hers. The guilt came slowly, not like a flood, but like a tide pulling her inch by inch away from shore. She thought of Ravi, his gentle smile, the way he always asked if she needed anything before she left for work, his quiet gratitude for small gestures. And yet, even now, she didn't feel sorrow as much as she felt stillness. She had crossed something inside herself. The morning after was polite. Karan offered coffee from the machine in the hallway, and she declined. They didn't talk about what had happened. Not really. What could be said that hadn't already been written on skin? They parted at the lobby, no goodbyes, no next steps. She took a cab straight to the train station. By the time she reached home, Ravi was at the kitchen table, reading the paper with his glasses slipping low on his nose. He looked up, smiled gently. "You're early," he said. "Did everything go okay?" Maya nodded, placing her bag beside the couch. "Yeah, smooth." The client seemed satisfied. He stood slowly, favoring his leg. "I thought you'd want tea. I started it a few minutes ago." He turned to the counter, reached for the mugs. Maya sat down, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Then she saw it, the crescent moon keychain, resting on the table beside his phone, the one she thought he had packed in her bag. She felt her stomach drop. Her breath caught. He hadn't given it to her. He had kept it. Ravi turned back toward her, 2 mugs in hand. His smile hadn't changed, but something behind his eyes had. It was softer, sadder, like he was seeing her for the first time, not the version she performed, but the truth beneath. He didn't ask anything, and she didn't explain. In that silence, 1,000 unspoken things passed between them. She took the mug with both hands and drank.